I'm focused on how do I create better social media content that leads to the podcast? How do we create better content on the podcast? We're talking about different camera angles. We're talking about different ways to edit the video. We're talking about a lot of stuff all the time. We're always trying to focus. Right now, we're in a grind season of grow business, grow business, grow business. But next year, you'll see some shifts for sure. So it's just about how do we improve? Podcast Growth Nation, welcome back to another episode of Podcast Growth University, where we talk all things podcasting all the time. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. We had a no BS chat about consistency. Maybe a heavy episode, but I was feeling it in the moment. And again, I want to make sure that you win. And sometimes helping somebody win, helping yourself win, means looking at the stuff that you don't want to look at and having a challenging conversation with yourself. Today, for episode number 126, the 2 best ways to set yourself apart as a host, specifically with guests. I could also do an episode at some point, maybe the best ways to set yourself apart as a host when you're not having guests. We can do that at some point as well. But this stems from a conversation I had yesterday with someone. I was on a podcast. So think about this and all the things we've talked about over the last 2 years at this point. I was on a podcast as a guest. Episode went really well. It was a great connection with someone. Awesome. Somebody heard that episode and reached out to the host and said, hey, can you connect me with Kevin? The host said, sure, I'll connect you with Kevin. Connected us through email. I had a call with him yesterday, and now I have a new connection. Will it end up being business or a client or a collaboration? Who knows? It'll end up being something. And the likelihood of it being something is 100% more than if I didn't ever meet this person. And I never would have met that person if I didn't go on the podcast. But he said, hey, can I ask you some questions about podcasts? And I said, yeah, of course. What do you got? And he just asked a bunch of questions. And I said, here's the thing that I'm really seeing a lot of lately. And I never would have seen this if I wasn't on the other end of being a guest as many times as I've had the privilege to be. I said there's 2 ways you can really set yourself apart as a host. There's 2 types of people that I remember days, weeks, months, and years after we do the interview. 1, the people who go above and beyond, the people who have really good questions, the people who are just genuinely curious, the people who have powerful personalities, the people who handle the communication very well, the people that go above and beyond. It's not the people that just ask me the questions that are in my bio. It's the people that really are curious. They're not checking the box, they're trying to improve. That's 1. So the personality, the competence, the communication, the relationship that you build with the host. That's 1. The second one is the content that you produce in post-production. Now, here's where things get a little bit challenging. Okay, am I saying every podcast should be on YouTube? I'm not necessarily saying every podcast should be on YouTube. Should you be recording video, even if you don't put it on YouTube? I would say probably. And here's why. When I go on a podcast as a guest, and it doesn't matter if I could love the host, and I get the email 3 weeks later or 3 days later or 6 weeks later or 3 months later, whatever it is, and they say, hey, our episode is going to drop on blank. And on the email, they have a photo attached where it's just a picture of me and it says, this is the title of the episode on this show. That isn't going to work most likely. You put an hour into the interview, maybe you put a half hour into the research, and then you put 10 minutes into the promotion of the episode. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. The way to differentiate yourself is to create really good content in post-production. Now, again, I know it's not sustainable for everybody to learn video editing, and I'm not saying that, but all I'm saying is we have to understand that there are ways to get your guests to share with a higher probability. And one of the best ways to do it is to create really good content. There is someone, his name's Aaron, and he is creating reels from the episode I was on every day and tagging me and and adding me as a collaborator. And the ones, they're all really good. I enjoy them. But I don't want my entire feed to be him and I, right? I have other stuff that I want to post. I want to post about my own life. So he's doing a really good job of creating content. He's doing a really good job of creating content that makes me want to share it. If he just sent me over a bunch of pictures that had episode number 47, whatever it is, from rock bottom to thriving with Kevin Palmieri, it's not going to do anything. It's not enough to draw someone in. It's not really enough necessarily to get engagement. That is a really big way to do it. I remember back when we were having guests on, I would put a lot of time into the post-production work. Now, again, I don't want it to come across as unsustainable because this was my full-time job, and by full-time job, I mean I was broke and I couldn't pay the bills, but I had time to do that stuff. But I also learned audio editing, and I learned video editing in Adobe Premiere long before there were programs where you just dropped your link and it created content for you. So I learned at a high level how to do all that stuff, and I would spend hours creating the assets for the guest. And what I would do is when I posted it and when Alan posted on social media, we would tag them and we would message them saying, hey, thanks again so very much. We just shared a post based on our episode. If you find that it would be valuable for your audience, we would love and appreciate it very much if you would share. And then, so here's the thought process that's going on in the guest's mind. One, is this a valuable piece of content? That's one. Another one is probably, does this make me look good or not? And the other one is it easy for me to share? It's this weird thing. If you've had me on your show and you have emailed me like a JPEG picture and said, hey, our episode's coming out, whenever, I most likely have emailed you back and said, hey, are you planning on creating any reels from this episode? And if so, when you post them on social media, please tag me, because that way I can share them, as opposed to you sending me an email that our episode's going to drop in 3 months when I'm going to forget for sure. Now, am I the typical guest? I don't know, right? I go on a lot of shows, so maybe if you're out there and you're only, and I'm not saying only in a bad way, but you're only going on one show a month, you're going to remember that show. It's like, oh yeah, I can't forget that I was on Kev's podcast that's dropping in January. I've done a lot, so I get a lot of emails of, hey, the show's dropping, this is coming up, whatever it may be. It's just way better just to tag the person on social media or communicate with them through social media on the platforms that you're going to be sharing. And I just think that it's very easy to lose sight, understandably, that you're putting a lot of time into the podcast, but you still have to put that much time into social media in order to get people to the podcast. The other thing that I hear all the time is, I started a Facebook group, it's not growing. It's like, yeah, it's not growing because you're not growing it. That's up to you. It's not up to the community to grow it. It's your job to grow it. And yeah, sometimes it is like a full-time job. But that is why starting a business is so hard, because you essentially are doing 5 full-time jobs at the same time, and you're usually getting paid for none of them. That's why it's so challenging, because that's essentially what you're doing. You're trying to build something. So that's one of the most common things I see. And here's the thing. It's kind of getting worse. I'm all for Opus Clip. I'm all for Riverside viral clips. Cool. Awesome. Everybody has access to that, though. So you have to find a way to be different, and you have to find a way to stand out with it. That's the thing. That's the thing that's going to make the difference. When everybody has access to it, you have to differentiate yourself. Because when anybody can use Opus Clip or Riverside viral clips or whatever, there's a million of those out there, and you're just doing the same thing as everyone else, it's not necessarily suggesting that you're going to stand out. That's where creativity comes in. You got to be creative. And you got to think outside the box. And maybe instead of creating one piece of content, you create 8 pieces of content for a guest, and maybe they'll share one, just testing that stuff out. But those are really the 2 things that have jumped off the page for me in terms of what do I remember about a host. One is the way the interview goes. Just the way the interview goes. Does it seem like they're just checking a box, or are they really into it? I've been on podcasts that I've gone back on for a second time, and there are certain shows that I would never do that for, just because it was like it wasn't a good conversation. And I'm not saying necessarily from a skill standpoint. I've been on shows with people who are super nervous because they're early. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about somebody who is just not hungry to be there. They don't care. It's just they don't take it seriously. Shout out to you. If you're not great at podcasting yet and you're nervous and you stumble over your words and sometimes the interview goes off the rails, don't care. If you're curious and you're hungry and you're humble and you're just intrigued by podcasting, I would do that interview every day, forever. I love that type of stuff. Now, again, I don't care about your numbers as much as somebody else does, because for me, it's mastery and impact. Mastery first. I want to get good at this. But that's something really common that I see. And then it makes sense, right? How do you differentiate yourself on the interview? And then how do you differentiate yourself after the interview? On the interview, it's the interview itself. After is the content. Those are really the two ways. Here's the other thing too. And I think this is a common misconception. When you have a guest on, you can share that content forever. Just because the episode came out 2 weeks ago does not mean you can't save that content and then share it a month from today on your story and then retag the guest. You can do that forever. So if you're not saving your content that you're creating, whatever you use, we use Google Drive, make a Google Drive folder and just put all of it in there. Put all of that content in there, and then theoretically you'll never really run out of podcast content to repurpose because you have a catalog of it. But I've heard a lot of people say, well, I have to drop the clip on the day that the episode comes out. Sure, you can drop the clip or you can promote it the day the episode comes out, but it doesn't mean you should never promote it again. You can promote it in a month. You can promote it in 2 months. Just do it differently than you did the first time. So maybe the first time you did a post on social media, throw it in your story this time. Maybe the first time you did a post on social media and you sent it to your email list. That's okay. You can do a special email where you say, Throwback Thursday. This is one of my favorite episodes we did in season 2. Boom. Here's the link. Re-engaging people. If you have new people to your mailing list, they haven't heard the episode potentially. If you have new followers on social media, they haven't heard the episode potentially. If you have new people in a Facebook group, they haven't heard the episode, right? So that's something. And people have a much shorter memory than we think.
Hey, I wanted to give my experience working with Kevin and the rest of the Next Level University team. It has been such a seamless relationship. He is so easy to work with, Kevin, and he gives you all the information you need, but doesn't overwhelm you. He's also meets you where you're at. So whatever you want to do, he'll make it work. And it's just, there's no stress, there's no drama. And everybody else that I've worked with has been patient with me because I am not technologically savvy. So they've been helpful and patient and just encouraging. And it's just been a fantastic experience. I highly, highly recommend working with them.
Meaning they're doing other stuff in life. They're most likely not going to remember that you dropped this episode 6 months ago, and they're not going to remember the whole thing. Some people might, right? Your super fans, your family members, they might. But I'm willing to bet most people probably won't. So you can just continue to repurpose it in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, a lot of it's about creativity. But I guess you can only be as creative as you are aware. So, I don't know, maybe learning a little bit about video editing wouldn't hurt. Because if you don't, you're kind of just up against whatever programs make life easier. That's why these are always hard episodes, because I believe you should learn a lot of different stuff if you want to be successful in podcasting. I think about this all the time. I think one of the reasons a lot of YouTubers are successful is because they started as video editors. There's a lot of channels I watch that they're almost like talking head videos with B-roll. So I follow a bodybuilder, and he talks a lot about what's going on in bodybuilding. And it takes a lot of time to make these videos. There was another video I watched recently. I watch weird stuff when I'm vegging out. It's this guy who flips cars for a living. So he'll buy a 2007 Toyota Camry that needs work and it needs, the check engine lights on and it needs some stuff. He'll buy it for $3,000. He'll fix it up, make it nice, and then sell it for $6,000. And I'm pretty sure a video I watched, I think it was 20 minutes long or 25 minutes long. He said it took 20 hours to make. But he did the whole thing. He did all the video. There was so much that went into it. There's a lot of people on YouTube that started out as video editors that then just made their own channel because that was the barrier to entry that they already had the answers to. It's kind of like if you can sing, you can probably be in any genre of music. All right, if you can speak, you can probably do, and I mean speak well, communicate well. You can probably do any leadership position fairly high level. I'm not saying you're going to be the best, but you can talk your way into it. If you know how to do audio editing and video editing, you have a lot more skills than you probably think you do. And that's how this whole thing started. I learned all that, and then people started asking me for help, and then we ended up building a podcast production company based on that. That never would have happened if I didn't have to learn audio editing in the beginning and video editing in the beginning. So kind of a tangent, but there are some skills that maybe you'll have to acquire that you haven't yet. And again, if that's of interest, comment on whatever platform you're watching, and I can do an episode on that, the top 5 skills or whatever you need as a podcaster, and I can really think about that. But yeah, I know, a little bit of a tangent. But from my perspective, those are the 2 best ways to set yourself apart as a host, especially when you're having guests. It's what you do on the interview, and it's what you do after. And that is the way to grow, too. It's what you do on the interview, and it's what you do after. It's really what you do before, what you do on, and what you do after. The before is the prep. The interview is the rep. And then the after is the promotion. It's what's the follow-up like? What does that look like? Do I reach out to that person and check in with them in the future? That's another thing. If you want to set yourself apart as a host, make sure you have a list of all the guests you've had on and send them an email. And I'm a custom email. I don't like the everything just goes automatically. I think it just devalues the relationship. Send them a message, put it in your calendar. I interviewed Bob on October 1st. On November 1st, I'm going to email Bob to check in. So 1 month after I do the interview, I check in with the person and just shoot him an email and say, hey, Bob, been thinking a lot about this since you and I chatted. How's everything going? You never know what could come from that relationship. And that's definitely going to set you apart because people are going to feel like you're thinking about them. And hopefully you are actually thinking about them, but they're going to feel cared about. And I'm telling you, most podcast hosts aren't doing that. Many podcast hosts, you go on their show, they add you to their email list, they send you emails you don't want, they send you a message and it says, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment on my podcast. Again, I'm all for it. I'm most likely not going to subscribe because I'm not going to listen to the episodes. Right? I can barely keep up with our content. I'm not consuming a lot of other podcasts. Not that I don't want to. But your guests are not your community. They're most likely not going to be your community. They're going to be your collaboration. You're going to collab with your guests. You're not going to build a community of guests, most likely. There are ways to do that, but that is a very, very, very rare strategy. So again, maybe it feels like 2 negative episodes back to back. I don't want it to be that way, and I don't ever want it to be negative. I want it to be real. And I genuinely want you to win. I do. I want you to win. And this is the same thing that I would tell you, whether you're watching this or you're listening to this. If you and I did an interview together, and then we reconnected a year later, and you said, hey, what could I shift? And these are the things you did. And I said to you, Chris, when I came on, it felt like you didn't care that much. It felt like you wanted to be somewhere else. You didn't even know my name. You didn't know how to pronounce my name. You didn't know the name of the podcast. It seems like you didn't do any research. And then after, you sent me an email with a JPEG saying, hey, Kev, please promote the episode. Here you go. It's like, that's not going to do it. No, we have to do more. We're not doing enough. You're expecting results that you're not earning. That would be the truth that I would give that person. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to do today. Now, am I saying every one of you is doing this? No. I'm willing to bet many of you are doing what I did in the beginning, and you're anxiety studying your guests so you know everything about them. That's something I always wanted to do. And yeah, I'm willing to bet a lot of you are going above and beyond when it comes to content after. But there's always room for improvement, right? Even with us. I'm focused on how do I create better social media content that leads to the podcast? How do we create better content on the podcast? We're talking about different camera angles. We're talking about different ways to edit the video. We're talking about a lot of stuff all the time. We're always trying to focus. Right now, we're in a grind season of grow business. But next year, you'll see some shifts for sure. So it's just about how do we improve. And obviously, I'm very big on that. Okay, couple things. One, Podcast Growth Nation is up and running. So Podcast Growth Nation is a free private Facebook group for podcasters by podcasters. Essentially, that is what it's made for. It's this, but behind the scenes, you can ask questions at any time. I don't care. I'll answer all your questions for free. I don't care. I want to add value. And it's a place to be around other podcasters who are doing what you're doing. Essentially, it's the Facebook group that I wanted as a podcaster. If I was going to look for a Facebook group 7 years ago when I started, it would be a Facebook group like this. So we'll have the link in the show notes for Podcast Growth Nation. And if you feel stuck in any way, shape, or form, if you're struggling with doing research for guests, if you want to change the name of your podcast, whatever it may be, I'll have my link in the show notes for a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session. I will help you with all of that stuff as much as humanly possible and try to make it the most valuable 30 minutes that we can possibly spend together. There's another thing too, the summit. So I spoke at a summit, and it's totally free. So I can put the link in the show notes for that. I'll have to send it over to the team, but it's totally free. I guess there's a way if you want to pay, it gives you unlimited replays or something. But there's a free option because I said I'm not interested in promoting it if it's not free for the audience. I don't expect my audience to have to pay to see me speak on something that I would just speak to them for free on. So I'll put the link in the show notes for that. I'll have the team put the link in the show notes for that as well. I think it's 20 speakers or something, and it's all different strategies. I talked about the guest ladder and the listener ladder. So if you want to deep dive into that, we'll have that link in the show notes. All right. As always, I appreciate you all very much. I hope that you're being a wonderful host and you're going above and beyond and you're being different and you're trying out stuff and you're getting outside your comfort zone and you're asking questions that make you nervous and you're just building real authentic relationships. That's what I hope most for you. What else do I hope? I hope the listens are going up. I know right now in much of the world or much of the U.S., we're changing seasons. So maybe you'll expect seasonal highs, seasonal lows. It depends. A lot of holidays coming up for the U.S., so we'll see how that goes for you. But do not get frustrated if the data isn't super positive because there are ebbs and flows, and a lot of them are seasonal depending on who your audience is. Maybe we can talk about that on another episode. All right, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you all next week.